Somewhere in this room, under the blanket, behind the closed eyes, a particular weight has settled onto the chest. Not pain, exactly. Not even sadness, exactly. Just weight. The kind that arrives uninvited at the end of a long day and sits there, patient, as if it has nowhere else to be tonight. You know this weight. Perhaps you are feeling it right now, even as these first words begin. The mind keeps turning the day over in its hands. What was said, what was left unsaid, what is waiting on the other side of sleep. And the body, tired as it is, cannot quite let go and rest. This is such an old and ordinary thing. People have been lying in the dark like this for as long as there has been dark to lie in. Long before clocks, long before walls. Someone, somewhere, under some other sky, was feeling the world settle into their chest in exactly this way. There is a way of looking at this, old, plain, and quiet, that does not begin with an answer. It begins with the weight itself, looked at honestly, the way you might finally look at a stone you have been carrying for so long you forgot you picked it up. Long ago, in small rooms not unlike this one, people sat with exactly this kind of heaviness and found, gently, that it could be set down, not thrown away, not solved. Just set down, the way a hand finally opens. You do not need to know anything about old teachings or far-off traditions to be here. You do not need to follow every word, or remember a single one of them tomorrow. There is nothing to study tonight, nothing to get right. Only this, a voice in the dark, a few old stories, and permission, finally, to let the day end. So if you are willing, let your shoulders drop a little from wherever they have been holding on. Let the jaw loosen, and take one slow breath. Not a deep, effortful breath, just an ordinary one. In, gently, and out, slow, like something pouring from a cup that has been too full for too long. Good, there is no rush from here. None at all. We have all night, and nowhere else to be. Let us begin, then, with the weight itself. There is an old way of saying it. We pick things up all day long, and we forget that our hands were made to open as easily as they close. A word someone said this morning, a worry about tomorrow, a small failure from years ago that still, somehow, has a seat at the table. None of it is heavy on its own. It becomes heavy only because we keep holding on, long after the holding stopped being useful. You are not failing at rest because you are doing something wrong. You are simply holding what you have always been taught to hold, and no one ever showed you how to set it down. That is all. That is the whole of it. Let us explore a story about this. Long ago, on a long road between two distant towns, a traveler walked with a heavy stone in a sack on her back. She had picked it up early in her journey. For what reason, she could no longer quite recall. Perhaps it had seemed important once. Perhaps someone had told her she might need it. By now it was simply part of the walking. The strap across her shoulder, the dull ache in her back, the stone shifting with every step like a second, heavier heartbeat. One evening, near the edge of a quiet valley, she came upon an old gardener resting beside the road, his hands empty, his face turned up toward the last of the light. "You walk so lightly," she said, lowering her sack with a groan. Don't you carry anything? I did. Once, he said. I picked it up, so I set it down. She laughed, a little bitterly. It isn't so simple. No, he agreed. It rarely is. The first time, she sat with him a while, rubbing her shoulder where the strap had worn a groove into her. She found herself, almost without deciding to, telling him about the stone. Not why she carried it, because she still didn't fully know, but how tired she was of carrying it. He listened the way old gardeners often do, without hurry, without offering advice she hadn't asked for. When she finally rose to continue her journey, she reached for the sack out of habit, and then stopped. Her hand hovered there a long moment. What if I need it later? She asked. Then the road will still be here, he said simply, and so will the stone, if you come back for it. But you do not have to finish today's walking with today's weight. She left the stone beside the gardener's small fire, just there at the edge of the road, not buried, not thrown into the river, just set down, and continued on. The journey did not become easy. The road was still long, the evening still cool, but something in her shoulders had changed that had nothing to do with the road at all. There is a second story sometimes told alongside this one. Two old friends once set out together on a long climb into the hills. One of them packed for every possibility, an extra coat in case of cold, dried food in case of hunger, a second pair of shoes in case the first wore through, until his pack was so heavy he had to stop and rest every short while, sweating under its weight even on the cool mornings. The other packed lightly, trusting that the hills, and his friend, and his own two hands would provide whatever the day actually required. By midday, the first friend was exhausted, his shoulders raw, his pace slowing to nearly nothing. The second simply walked, stopping now and then, not because he had to, but because he wanted to look at the view. How do you carry so little? The first asked, breathless. I stopped packing for every tomorrow, the second said. I pack for today. Tomorrow can pack for itself when it comes. Neither story tells you to throw everything away. The traveler did not need to abandon every stone she would ever carry, and the friend with the heavy pack was not foolish for caring about the cold. The shift, in both stories, is smaller and gentler than that. It is simply this. Most of what we carry out of habit, not necessity. We pick something up because it seemed important in some earlier moment, and then we simply forget to ask, later, whether it is still ours to hold. Tonight, you do not have to throw anything away forever. You only have to set it down for now, beside the road, just for the night, exactly where you can find it again tomorrow if you truly need it. The conversation that didn't go the way you wanted, the long list of things still undone. None of it disappears. It will all still be there in the morning, patient, unharmed, waiting exactly where you left it. But it does not have to finish this day with you. It does not have to climb into bed and lie down on your chest. You might, if it helps, imagine setting one particular weight down right now. Not far away, just there, beside you, on the floor by the bed, where you can see it, and know it is safe and still yours, but where it no longer has to rest against your ribs while you sleep. Let us pause here a moment. There is nothing you need to do with what has just been said. Let it settle the way sediment settles in still water, quietly, on its own time. Notice your breath, wherever it happens to be right now, not changing it, just noticing it, the way you might notice rain on a window without needing to do anything about the rain. Let your hands, wherever they are resting, become a little heavier, a little more given over to the bed beneath them. When you are ready, and only when you are ready, we will go on together. There is another old image, just as plain as the stone, that speaks to this same heaviness from a different angle. Water. Picture a jar of water that has been stirred and carried and jostled all day long, bumped against a doorway, sloshed on a long walk, shaken by every small disturbance of an ordinary day. By evening, it is cloudy, muddy even. You cannot see the bottom of it. You cannot see anything in it at all. This is, more or less, what a mind feels like at the end of a long day. Every conversation, every interruption, every small worry has stirred it just a little more, until by the time you lie down, it feels thick with everything that happened, every thought tumbling over the last. Nothing settled, nothing clear. Here is the part that is easy to forget. Lying there at night, wishing the mind would just be quiet. Muddy water does not need to be fixed. It does not need to be stirred harder, or poured out, or replaced with new water. It only needs one thing, to be left alone. Set a jar of muddy water on a still shelf, and do nothing else, and within a little while, on its own, with no effort from you at all, the silt begins to settle. Because that is simply what happens when something stops being stirred. The water does not become something other than what it was. It simply becomes still, and in its stillness, clear. Let us explore a story about this. In an old monastery in the mountains, a young apprentice came to an elder one evening, frustrated and tired. "I cannot make my mind be quiet," he said. "I sit and try to settle it, and the moment I try, it only stirs more." The elder said nothing for a while. Then he filled a clay bowl with water from a nearby stream, stirred it with a stick until it turned the color of the riverbank, and set it on the table between them. "Now," the elder said, "make this water clear." The apprentice frowned, picked up the stick, and stirred it the opposite direction, hoping to undo the cloudiness. The water only grew murkier. "You cannot clear muddy water by stirring it more cleverly," the elder said. "Not even in the opposite direction. Not even with the best intentions." "Then what do I do?" "Nothing," the elder said. "Set it down. Walk away. Come back later." The apprentice did not believe this could be the whole answer, but he set the bowl on a shelf in the corner and returned to his evening tasks. When he came back, hours later, the water sat clear and undisturbed, the silt resting quietly at the bottom, exactly as the elder had said it would. "The mind works the same way," the elder told him. "You cannot think your way to a quiet mind. Thinking is the stirring. What clears it is not effort. It is simply being left alone long enough to settle on its own." The apprentice did not change his mind that evening through understanding alone, but something in him relaxed, just slightly, at the idea that he did not have to work so hard at the very thing that only required him to stop working at all. There is a second story, gentler still, told sometimes alongside this one. A grandmother used to keep a large jar of water by her kitchen window, always a little cloudy from the well it came from. Her granddaughter, visiting one summer, kept trying to help by stirring it, certain that stirring would somehow clean it faster. Each time, the grandmother would simply smile, take the spoon gently from her hand, and set the jar back on the sill. "You are trying to hurry something that does not hurry," she said. "Sit with me instead, and we will let it clear on its own." They sat together at the window while the afternoon passed, talking of small things, and by evening, without either of them doing anything more to it, the water in the jar had cleared completely, the late light passing through it like through glass. You may have noticed, lying here tonight, that the harder you try to make your mind be still, the busier it becomes. This is not a failure of your effort. It is simply how minds work, the same as muddy water. Trying to think your way to calm is its own kind of stirring. What actually clears a mind, more often than not, is something much simpler and much less impressive. Being left alone, not fixed, not forced, just left, gently, undisturbed for as long as it takes. You do not have to make your mind quiet tonight. You only have to stop stirring it quite so hard and let it do what water has always known how to do on its own. If a thought rises now, you do not need to chase it away or follow it anywhere. Let it rise the way silt rises when the jar is jostled, and then, just as naturally, let it begin to settle again. There is nothing wrong with you for having thoughts tonight. There is nothing to fix. There is only this slow, old, patient process, the same one that has cleared troubled water in kitchens and monasteries and quiet rooms for longer than anyone can say, happening, now, in you, whether you notice it or not. Let us rest here a moment before going on. Feel the place where your body meets the bed, the shoulder, the hip, the side of the head against the pillow, and let that place grow a little heavier, a little more settled, the way silt settles toward the bottom of a still jar. There is nothing to stir tonight, nothing to clear by force, only this quiet permission to be undisturbed for a while. When your breath feels ready, we will continue on together. There is another old idea, just as gentle, that speaks to a different kind of weight. Not the weight of stones or muddy water, but the weight of feeling like you should already know how to do this, how to rest, how to be calm, how to be, somehow, a finished version of yourself by now. Maybe you have noticed this quiet pressure before, even tonight, a sense that you should have figured out by now how to sleep easily, how to let go of a hard day, how to simply be at peace the way it seems other people must be. And when you cannot, a small, familiar voice arrives to tell you that you are somehow behind, somehow doing it wrong, somehow the only one still struggling with something so ordinary as lying still in the dark. This voice is not telling you the truth. It only sounds like the truth because it is so familiar. There is an old phrase for a different way of meeting each moment, sometimes called the mind of a beginner, not because beginners know less, but because a beginner's mind has not yet decided what it already knows, and so it can still meet a thing freshly, without the heaviness of having to already be an expert at it. A cup that is already full cannot receive anything new. It is not the cup's fault, it is simply full. But a cup left a little empty, a little open, can be filled again and again, endlessly, with whatever the moment happens to bring. You are allowed, tonight, to be that kind of cup, not someone who has mastered rest, just someone willing to receive it, freshly, the way a beginner receives anything, without the burden of already knowing how. Let us explore a story about this. A young student traveled a long way to study with an old teacher known for great wisdom, arriving certain of his own cleverness, eager to be recognized for everything he already understood. He spoke at length to the teacher about all he had read, all he had practiced, all he believed he already knew about stillness and peace. The old teacher listened, nodding, and then poured the student a cup of tea. He poured slowly, steadily, and kept pouring even after the cup was full, until the tea ran over the edge, across the table, onto the student's robe. "Stop! It's overflowing!" the student cried, leaping back. "Yes," the teacher said, setting down the kettle. "Just like your mind. It is already so full of what you know that there is no room left for anything I might offer you." The student sat in damp silence, embarrassed, and then, slowly, something in him loosened. He had come so far to learn, and had spent the whole journey making sure there was no space left to actually learn anything. "I would like to begin again," he said quietly, as someone who knows very little. "Good," the teacher said, and poured him a fresh, half-empty cup. There is a second story, smaller, often told beside this one. An old potter took on an apprentice who had worked with clay for many years already, under other teachers, in other towns. The apprentice, certain he already understood the craft, kept correcting the potter's methods, insisting his own old habits were better. For many weeks, his pots came out lopsided, cracked, or collapsed entirely under their own weight, while the potter's simplest, plainest bowls held their shape, with what looked like no effort at all. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, the apprentice finally asked, "What am I doing wrong?" "Nothing is wrong with your hands," the potter said, "but your hands cannot learn anything new, while your mind is so certain it already knows everything old." The apprentice set aside, for a while, everything he believed he understood about clay, and began again, as though he had never touched it before. His pots, slowly, began to hold their shape. You are not behind, lying here tonight, for not yet knowing how to rest easily. You are not failing some test that everyone else has already passed. Perhaps no one has truly passed it. Perhaps the people who seem most at peace are simply the ones who have learned, again and again, to set down what they think they already know about themselves, and begin again, freshly, as a kind of beginner, even at something as old and ordinary as sleep. You do not have to be good at this tonight. You only have to be willing, the way a beginner is willing, to let the evening teach you something new about rest, without insisting you already know exactly how it should feel. If it helps, you might let go, just for tonight, of the idea that you should already know how to do this. Let yourself be new at it, new at resting, new at breathing, new at simply being a body, in a bed at the end of a long day. There is nothing wrong with being new at something. Everyone, every single night, is given the chance to begin again. Let us pause here together for a moment. Notice the weight of your own head against the pillow, exactly as it is right now, without trying to make it feel any particular way. There is no correct way for your body to be resting tonight. There is only the way it actually is, which is enough, exactly as it is. Let your exhale be a little longer than your inhale, if that feels easy, not forced, just allowed. There is one more old idea worth sitting with for a while. Before we go further, perhaps the oldest of all, and in its own quiet way, the most comforting: nothing stays. This can sound, at first, like a sad thing to say at the end of the day, but sit with it a little longer, and it begins to feel like something closer to relief. The hard conversation from this morning will not stay forever, exactly as it was, pressing on your chest. Neither, in fact, will anything else. Not the good things, not the bad things, not even this particular feeling of heaviness you may be carrying right now. It will pass, the way every single feeling before it has passed, the way weather passes across an open sky. Picture the sky for a moment, wide, open, untouched by whatever moves across it. Clouds gather, sometimes thick and grey, sometimes nearly black with rain, and the sky beneath them never argues, never panics, never insists the clouds stay or go faster than they will. It simply remains open, and in its own time, every cloud moves on, and the sky is exactly as open as it always was. You are not the cloud passing through tonight. You are something more like the sky, wider than whatever weather happens to be moving across you right now. The heaviness you feel is real and worth taking seriously, the way real weather is worth taking seriously. But it is weather. It is not the whole of the sky. Let us explore a story about this. In a small village by the sea, an old fisherman was known for a strange kind of calm that nothing seemed to disturb. Not storms that kept other boats in the harbour for days, not poor seasons that left nets nearly empty, not even, the villagers whispered, the loss of his own boat one terrible winter. A young fisherman, frightened after his first bad storm at sea, came to ask him how he managed never to be shaken by anything. "You misunderstand," the old man said. "I am shaken by everything. I was terrified in that storm, same as you. I grieved my boat for a long season after I lost it. Then how do you seem so calm now?" The old fisherman gestured out at the water, where the tide was slowly, steadily pulling back from the shore. It comes all the way in, and then it goes all the way out, and the shore does not fight either direction. It simply lets the water do what water does, trusting that the tide will turn again, as it always has. "But the shore doesn't feel anything," the young man said. "Perhaps not," the old fisherman said. "But you can. You can feel the storm fully while it is here, and still trust, somewhere beneath the fear, that like every tide before it, it will turn. That is not the absence of feeling. It is simply not mistaking the tide for the shore." There is a second story, briefer, often set beside this one. A small child once cried inconsolably over a broken toy, certain the sadness would last forever. Her grandmother sat with her, not rushing her out of the tears, simply staying close. "I know it feels like this sadness will never end," the grandmother said. "But watch. Even now, while you are still crying, your breathing is already starting to slow. The storm in you is already turning, even before you can feel it turning. Sure enough, within the hour, the child was outside again, the broken toy forgotten, laughing about something else entirely. That it was already passing, the way it always does. Whatever is sitting on your chest tonight, the hard day, the worry about tomorrow, the particular heaviness that brought you here, it is, in its own way, weather, real weather, worth feeling fully while it is here, but weather, all the same. It is already moving, even now, even if you cannot yet feel it moving. In the whole history of every difficult night anyone has ever had, stayed exactly the same forever. Tonight will not be the first time that happens. You do not have to make tonight's weather pass any faster. You only have to remember, gently, that you are the sky beneath it, wider than whatever is moving across you right now, and that the sky, no matter how dark the clouds, has never once stopped being open underneath them. Let us rest here together for a moment. Imagine, if it helps, that wide open sky just above you now, even through the ceiling, even through the dark, vast, unhurried, holding whatever weather happens to be passing, without needing it to be any different than it is. Let your own breathing move like that sky moves, unhurried, unbothered by what passes through it. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is another shape this same teaching sometimes takes, not a sky, but a bowl, an empty bowl, in particular, which can seem, at first, like the least useful thing in any kitchen. It holds nothing. It offers nothing on its own. And yet it is precisely its emptiness that makes it useful at all. Because an empty bowl can be filled with anything: rice, water, soup, a handful of fruit, whatever the day happens to bring. A bowl already full of yesterday's meal has no room for tonight's. We often treat our own minds like a bowl that must always be full to be worth anything. Full of plans, full of opinions, full of certainty about how things should go. But a mind this full, like a bowl this full, has nowhere left to receive what is actually here right now. It is too busy being full of yesterday and tomorrow and every old idea about who we are supposed to be, to notice the quiet, ordinary moment actually in front of it. This one, right here, the one where you are simply lying still, breathing, allowed to want nothing else. There is something almost generous about emptiness, looked at this way, not a lack, a kind of open hand, ready to hold whatever is actually offered, rather than insisting on what it already expects. Let us explore a story about this. In a small village at the edge of a wide valley, there lived a weaver known for cloth so fine that people came from distant towns just to see it made. A young weaver, eager to learn her secret, watched her for many days and noticed something strange. No half-finished thread left hanging, no old pattern left waiting. Why do you clear it so completely each time? The young weaver asked. Wouldn't it save time to leave it ready for the next piece? If I leave the old pattern on the loom, the weaver said, then when the next cloth comes to me, I will only know how to weave it the old way. I clear the loom so that whatever wants to be woven next has room to come through as it actually is, not as I already expect it to be. The young weaver did not understand at first, but she began clearing her own loom completely after each piece, resisting the urge to carry old patterns forward out of habit. And slowly, her work began to surprise even her. Patterns she had never planned for, colors she would never have chosen on purpose, emerging simply because she had left room for them. There is a second story, often told beside this one. A traveler, exhausted from a long journey, arrived at a small inn and asked the innkeeper for whatever she had to offer. The innkeeper brought out a single empty bowl and set it before him. "This is all you have?" he asked, confused. "This is everything," she said, smiling, and proceeded to fill it, first with rice, then with vegetables from her garden, then with a portion of the fish she had caught that morning, then with a few herbs picked along the path that day. By the time she finished, the bowl held a meal more generous than he had eaten in weeks. "I thought you had nothing," he said. "The bowl had nothing," she said. "That is exactly why it could hold everything I had to give. You are allowed, tonight, to be that kind of empty, not lacking, but open, not because there is something wrong with what filled your day, but because the day is over now, and what it held does not need to keep filling the bowl tonight. You can let the bowl of your mind sit empty for a while, not because emptiness is the goal, but because an empty bowl is simply ready for whatever comes next. And tonight, what comes next is rest. You do not have to keep your mind full of today in order to honor today. You can clear the loom. You can empty the bowl, not as loss, but as room for sleep, room for whatever quiet thing the night actually wants to offer you, instead of whatever you already expect it to hold. Let us pause here a moment. If it feels true, imagine your mind right now as a bowl, gently being emptied, not by force, just by allowing each thought to be poured out, one at a time, the way water pours from a cup that no longer needs to be full. There is nothing wrong with the thoughts as they go. They have simply finished their part of the day. Let your hands, resting wherever they are, feel a little like that emptied bowl too, open, unclenched, holding nothing more than they need to hold right now. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is one more old image worth sitting with, closely related to the empty bowl, and perhaps even simpler, a cup of tea, held in cold hands. Picture it for a moment, the warmth moving from the cup into your palms, the small rising steam, the particular plainness of just sitting somewhere quiet, holding something warm, with nowhere else you are required to be. There is nothing remarkable about this image. That is exactly the point. The whole teaching, in its way, lives inside that very ordinariness. So much of the heaviness we carry comes from being somewhere other than where we actually are. Replaying a conversation from this morning, or rehearsing one that hasn't happened yet. While the cup of tea in front of us, real and warm and entirely available, goes unnoticed and cold. We are rarely overwhelmed by the present moment itself. We are overwhelmed by the past we keep carrying into it, and the future we keep dragging in to meet us there. This moment, right now, you, lying here, the weight of the blanket, the particular quality of the dark in this room, the sound of your own breath, has never once, in the whole history of your life, been too heavy to bear on its own. It is the moment plus yesterday, plus tomorrow, plus every other moment piled on top of it, that becomes too much. But that pile is not actually here. It is only ever in the mind. This moment, by itself, just this one, is almost always small enough to hold. Let us explore a story about this. A young monk, newly arrived at a quiet mountain temple, complained to an old teacher that his mind would not stop racing. Always ahead to tomorrow's tasks. Always back to yesterday's mistakes. Never simply where his body happened to be. The old teacher invited him to share a pot of tea. As they sat, the young monk kept speaking of his worries about the coming season, the harvest, the long winter ahead. "Drink your tea," the teacher said gently. The young monk took a sip, still speaking of the future. "No," the teacher said. "Drink your tea." And he said nothing else, simply watched, until the young monk finally stopped, looked down at the cup in his hands, and noticed, really noticed, the warmth of it, the particular bitterness of the leaves, the steam rising into the cool mountain air. For a few seconds, his mind went quiet, not because he had solved anything about the harvest or the winter, but because he was, for the first time that day, actually where his body was. That, the teacher said, is the whole of it. Not forever, just now and then, a few seconds at a time, returning to your tea. There is a second story, often told beside this one. An old craftsman, famous for carving small wooden birds, so lifelike they seemed about to fly, was once asked how he managed such detail without ever growing frustrated. "I am not carving a bird," he said. Right now. The bird takes care of itself, one cut at a time, as long as I stay with the one I am actually making. Tonight, you do not have to solve tomorrow, or finish replaying today. You only have to be here for this one breath, and then the next one. The way the craftsman is only ever here for this one cut. The whole of tomorrow does not have to be carried tonight. Only this moment does. And this moment, on its own, without the weight of every other moment stacked on top of it, is almost always light enough to hold. If it helps, you might let your attention rest, just for a little while, on something small and entirely present. The particular texture of the blanket under your hand, the quiet hum of the room, the rise and fall of your own chest. Not because the future doesn't matter, just because, right now, it isn't actually here. Only this is here. And this, by itself, is enough. Let us rest here together for a moment. Feel the weight of your body exactly where it is right now, in this one moment. Not the moment an hour ago, not the moment tomorrow morning. Just this one. Let your breath be the only thing you are doing for a few seconds. Not fixing it, not deepening it, just noticing it arrive and leave, arrive and leave. When you are ready, we will go on together. That speaks to something most of us were never taught, the wisdom of non-doing. Not laziness, not giving up, something closer to knowing when effort is helping, and when it has quietly become the very thing standing in the way. We are taught, almost from the beginning, that everything worth having must be earned through trying harder. If something is wrong, fix it. If you are not calm, work at calm. If sleep will not come, try harder to sleep. And yet, and you may have noticed this yourself, lying here some nights, trying harder to sleep is almost always the surest way to chase it further off. The mind that grips at rest squeezes it out of its own hands, the way water slips faster through fingers that close too tightly around it. There is a different way of meeting a difficulty, far older than the instinct to force it, and far gentler. Not careless, not passive, simply unforced. Doing only what the moment actually calls for, and then stepping back, and trusting the rest to happen the way it has always happened, without needing to be pushed. Let us explore a story about this. In a quiet town at the edge of some hills, a young gardener took over a small plot of land that had gone wild with weeds for many seasons. Determined to bring order to it quickly, she spent every waking hour pulling, digging, yanking weeds out by their roots the moment she saw them, certain that more effort would mean a tidier garden sooner. By midsummer, her back ached, her hands were raw, and the garden, despite all her work, looked tired and bare, the soil disturbed so often that nothing new had a chance to settle and grow. An old gardener who tended the plot beside hers worked very differently. He would walk the rows slowly each morning, remove only what truly needed removing, and then simply leave the rest alone for long stretches, trusting the soil, the rain, and the season to do most of the work without him. His garden, with what looked like far less effort, grew fuller and more abundant with each passing week. "How do you manage so much, doing so little?" she finally asked him, exhausted. "I do exactly what is needed," he said, and then I stop. The soil does not need me hovering over it every hour to grow something. It only needs me to stop interfering long enough to do what it already knows how to do. She began, slowly, to work less, not less carefully, but less anxiously, trusting that the garden and the season and the quiet hours when she did nothing at all were not wasted time, but part of how anything actually grows. There is a second story, often told beside this one. A young weaver, eager to finish a difficult pattern quickly, kept pulling threads tighter and tighter whenever they seemed loose, certain that tension would make the cloth stronger. Instead, the fabric kept puckering, twisting, refusing to lie flat no matter how hard she worked at it. An old weaver watching her finally said, "You are trying to force the threads to behave." Threads do not behave under force. They settle, on their own, if you let them lie at the tension they actually want, rather than the tension you are demanding of them. The young weaver loosened her grip, let the threads find their own natural give, and the cloth, almost immediately, began to lie smooth and even. Not because she had stopped caring about the result, but because she had stopped fighting the very material she was working with. You are not failing tonight if rest will not come the moment you reach for it. You are simply discovering, the way the gardener and the weaver did, that some things cannot be forced into being, only allowed. Sleep is one of those things. You cannot grip it into arriving any more than you can yank a weed and call it a finished garden, or pull a thread tight and call it a finished cloth. So perhaps, tonight, you do not have to try quite so hard to fall asleep. You might simply do the small, true things that are actually yours to do, lying still, breathing slowly, letting your body settle, and then stop. Stop reaching, stop gripping. Let the rest of it happen the way a garden grows, the way cloth settles, the way it has always happened, in its own unhurried time. Whenever you finally stop demanding that it hurry, let us pause here a moment. Notice anywhere in your body that might still be gripping, the hands, the jaw, the space between the eyebrows, and see if it is willing, just slightly, to let go of its hold, the way a gardener finally sets down the trowel for the evening. There is nothing more to do right now, only this, lying still, and letting whatever is going to happen, happen, in its own unhurried time. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is another old image worth turning toward now. Not water, not weather this time, but stone. A mountain, in particular, the way it sits beneath every kind of weather, without once needing the weather to be different than it is. Storms come to a mountain, snow comes, and wind, and sometimes lightning splitting the dark. And the mountain, through all of it, does not brace, does not argue. It does not insist the storm pass faster than it will. It simply remains what it has always been, vast, rooted, unmoved at its center, even while its surface is lashed by wind and rain. By morning, the storm has gone somewhere else, the way storms always do, and the mountain is still there, exactly as it was, only slightly washed clean by what passed over it. You may feel, some nights, like you are only ever the weather, tossed about by whatever feeling happens to be moving through you, certain that if the feeling is strong, you yourself must be shaken to your foundation. But you are not only the weather. Somewhere beneath the storm of tonight's worry, tonight's heaviness, there is something in you that has not actually moved, something as old and unshaken as a mountain's root, however little it feels that way right now. Let us explore a story about this. High in a range of distant mountains, an old hermit lived alone in a small stone hut, weathering storms each winter that would have frightened most travelers off the mountain entirely. A young traveler, caught in one such storm, took shelter with him and asked, trembling, how he managed to live so calmly through such violent weather. Year after year, the storm is loud, the hermit said, but it only touches the surface of the mountain. Deep inside, where the rock has settled for longer than either of us has been alive, nothing is moving at all. I am not calm because the storm is gentle. I am calm because I have learned to live from that deeper, unmoved place, rather than from the surface where the wind happens to be blowing. But how do you find that deeper place? The traveler asked. when the wind is so loud. You do not have to find it, the hermit said. It has never left. You only have to remember, while the wind howls, that you are not only the wind, you are also the mountain it is blowing across. There is a second story, briefer, told sometimes beside this one. A young apprentice, terrified during his first violent storm at sea, clung to the ship's rail, certain the boat would surely break apart beneath him. An old sailor beside him, entirely calm, said only, "The waves are large tonight, but the sea beneath them, deep down, where the keel sits, is still and unmoved, the way it always is. The ship is not only riding the waves on the surface, it is also resting in that deep, unmoving water beneath them. The storm tonight, whatever it is for you, the worry, the heaviness, the restless turning of the mind, is real and loud, the way every storm is loud while it is happening. But it is moving across something in you that has not actually moved, some old, steady, rooted part of you that has weathered every storm before this one, and is, even now, quietly waiting beneath tonight's weather for the wind to finally pass. You do not have to stop the storm to find that steadiness. You only have to remember, gently, that it is there, beneath the noise, beneath the restlessness, exactly the way it has always been, exactly the way a mountain's root remains long after the snow has melted and the season has turned. Let us rest here together a moment. Feel, if you can, some quiet, unmoved place in your own body right now, perhaps low in the belly, perhaps somewhere along the spine, that has not been shaken by anything that happened today, no matter how loud the day became. Let your attention rest there for a few breaths, the way a traveler might finally settle near the warm center of a mountain hut, far from the wind outside. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is one more old image worth sitting with now, gentler than a storm, and it concerns a door, specifically, what we do when someone unwelcome knocks on it. So often, when a hard feeling arrives at night, sadness, worry, a loneliness that seems to have no clear cause, our first instinct is to bar the door against it, to tell it, quite firmly, that it is not welcome here, that we are busy, that we would like it to please go somewhere else and trouble someone else instead. Almost without exception, the feeling knocks louder. It does not leave because we have told it to. It simply waits at the door, patient, knocking, until we are forced to either let it in or spend the whole night standing against the door, exhausted from holding it shut. There is an old way of meeting this differently, sometimes spoken of as treating every feeling like a guest at the door, however unwelcome it seems at first. Not because the feeling is pleasant, simply because a guest, once welcomed in, fed, and given a place to sit, tends to settle. This does not mean inviting a hard feeling to stay forever, or pretending it is something other than difficult. It only means opening the door, however briefly, and saying, in effect, I see you are here. You can sit for a while. You do not have to fight your way in. Let us explore a story about this. In a small house at the edge of a village, an old woman was known for taking in any traveler who knocked on her door, no matter how late the hour, no matter how unkempt or troubled they seemed on arrival. Her neighbors often asked why she did not simply turn the more difficult ones away. A traveler who is turned away does not disappear, she said. He only goes and knocks somewhere else, more desperate than before, having been refused once already. But a traveler who is welcomed in, fed a little, and allowed to rest, almost always leaves on his own, in his own time, far more peacefully than he arrived. Full of some grief he could not quite name, she did not ask him to explain himself, or to calm down before entering. She simply opened the door, set a bowl of warm soup in front of him, and let him sit by the fire as long as he needed. By morning, he had grown quiet on his own, thanked her, and continued on his way, the grief still there in him somewhere, perhaps, but no longer pounding at any door. There is a second story, often told alongside this one. A young monk, troubled by a persistent fear that visited him every night just before sleep, complained to an old teacher that no matter how he tried to push the fear away, it kept returning, stronger each time. You are fighting at the door, the teacher said. Try instead opening it. Let the fear in. Give it a place to sit. Ask it, even, what it has come to tell you. The young monk, skeptical, tried this the next night. When the fear arrived, instead of bracing against it, he simply said, inwardly, I see you. Come in. Sit here a while. To his surprise, the fear, having been welcomed rather than fought, did not grow larger. It sat with him for a little while, and then, on its own, without being pushed, it grew quiet, and eventually it left. It is strange, he told the teacher the next day. I thought fighting it was the only way to be rid of it. But fighting only ever made it stay longer. Most difficult feelings are like that, the teacher said. They knock harder, the longer they are refused. They settle, almost on their own, the moment they are finally let in. Whatever feeling has knocked on your door tonight, the worry, the sadness, the restlessness that brought you here, you do not have to fight it off at the threshold. You might, instead, simply notice it is there, and let it know, gently, that it can sit for a while if it needs to. You do not have to feed it forever. You do not have to give it the whole house, just a chair by the fire, for as long as it takes to settle. It takes no less strength to open a door calmly than to hold it shut all night. It is simply a different kind of strength, the kind that trusts a feeling will tire and settle far sooner if it is welcomed than if it is endlessly refused. Let us pause here a moment. If a feeling has been knocking at your door tonight, you might, just for a moment, imagine opening it. Not flinging it wide, just enough to let the visitor in, see that they are tired too, and offer them a seat by whatever fire you have left burning. There is nothing more required of you than that. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is a gentler image still, perhaps the gentlest of the evening so far, and it concerns a lamp, one small lamp, lit in a window, on a cold night, for no one in particular, except perhaps for whoever might need to see it. Think, for a moment, of how you would treat someone else who arrived at your door tonight exhausted, having carried far too much for far too long, their face drawn with the particular tiredness of someone who has been hard on themselves all day. You would not scold them for being tired. You would not list, helpfully, all the ways they should have managed the day better. You would simply bring them in from the cold, sit them by the fire, and let them rest, without requiring anything else of them first. And yet, and this is worth sitting with for a moment, we so rarely offer ourselves that same lamp in the window. We arrive at the end of our own long day, exhausted in exactly the way that traveler would be, and instead of welcoming ourselves in, we stand at our own door, reciting everything we did wrong, every way we fell short, every reason we have not yet earned the rest we are so plainly asking for. There is an old, simple correction to this. Though it can take a long time to settle into a person, you are allowed to be as gentle with yourself as you would be with any tired stranger who knocked on your door tonight. You do not have to earn that gentleness first. It is not a reward for a day well lived. It is simply how a lamp is lit, for whoever needs it, including, especially, the one carrying it home. Let us explore a story about this. In a small village by the sea, a fisherman returned home one night, after a long, exhausting day, his nets nearly empty despite his best effort, his hands raw from the work, his spirit lower than it had been in some time. He stood outside his own door for a long while before going in, ashamed of how little he had to show for the day. His grandmother, who lived with him, opened the door before he could knock, took one look at his face, and simply said, "Come in, sit by the fire. The nets can wait until morning." "But I caught almost nothing today," he said. "I don't deserve to rest before I've made up for it." "The fire does not ask what you caught," she said, sitting him down and wrapping a blanket over his shoulders. "It only asks that you are cold and tired, and it is warm. That is enough reason for anyone." He sat by the fire a long while that night, the day's failure slowly losing some of its weight, not because it had changed, but because he had finally allowed himself to be warmed regardless of it. Often told beside this one, an old lamplighter walked the same quiet streets every evening, lighting each lamp in turn, regardless of who might be passing by to see it, regardless of whether anyone noticed his work at all. A young apprentice once asked him why he bothered lighting lamps on streets that were often nearly empty by the time he reached them. I do not light them for who happens to be walking by, the old man said. I light them because the night is dark, and a lit lamp is simply a kindness the street can offer to whoever passes through it later, even if I never see who that turns out to be. But what if no one needs it that night? Then it has cost nothing to have lit it anyway, the lamplighter said. And if even one tired traveler finds their way more easily because of it, it was worth lighting regardless. You might think of your own gentleness with yourself this way tonight. Not something to be earned by how well today went. Not a reward handed out only on the days you performed well enough to deserve it, but simply a lamp you are allowed to light for yourself, the way you would light it for anyone else arriving home tired and a little lost. You do not need to have caught a full net today to deserve the fire. You only need to be tired, and here, and willing to come in out of the cold. If it helps, you might say to yourself now, quietly, the same thing the grandmother said to the fisherman. Come in, sit by the fire. The rest can wait until morning. You do not have to have earned this rest. You only have to be here, ready to receive it. Let us rest here together a moment. Imagine, if you can, one small warm light somewhere nearby, a lamp in a window, a candle by the bed, the last warm coal of a fire, lit there simply because the night is dark and you are tired, with no further reason required. Let your whole body lean just slightly toward that warmth, the way a cold traveler leans toward any fire offered to them. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is one more image worth dwelling in for a while now, perhaps the warmest of the evening, and it has to do with home. Not a particular house, not a particular place on a map, but that older, simpler sense of home, a hearth with a fire still glowing, a room where the shoulders finally come down, a place where nothing further is required of you the moment you walk through the door. So many of us, without quite noticing, spend our days feeling as though home is somewhere we are still traveling toward, some better version of ourselves, just a little further down the road, some calmer life, just past this next difficulty. We treat rest itself like a destination we have not yet arrived at, a reward waiting at the end of enough hard work, enough proof, enough getting everything right first. But here is the old quiet correction, easy to forget, and worth saying slowly. You do not have to travel anywhere else to deserve to come home. You are not waiting outside some better life, knocking, hoping eventually to be let in a way that matters more than it might seem right now, lying here, breathing, tired at the end of a long day. This, already, can be the hearth. This, already, can be home enough for tonight. There is an old phrase for this, sometimes spoken of as already being whole, already enough, with nothing further needed to qualify for rest. Not because nothing in your life needs tending, simply because the tending and the resting were never meant to wait for each other. You can be a work still in progress, and also, fully, already home enough to put your feet up tonight. Let us explore a story about this. A traveler journeyed for many years through distant lands, searching for a particular village he had heard described as the most peaceful place in the world. A place, he was told, where everyone seemed to have already found exactly what he himself was still seeking. He crossed mountains, crossed rivers, asked at every town he passed whether this was, at last, the peaceful village he sought. Years later, exhausted, having found no place that matched the description, he returned, defeated, to his own small house, at the edge of his original town. The same worn door, the same small hearth, the same window, looking out over the same quiet street he had left so long ago. An old neighbor, seeing him return, asked how his search had gone. I never found it, the traveler said. I searched everywhere, and the peaceful village I was looking for was nowhere to be found. The old neighbor smiled gently. Did you look here? Here? This is just my own home. I've lived here my whole life. And in all your years of searching, the neighbor said, did you ever once arrive somewhere, sit down by an evening fire, and simply let yourself rest there, fully, without already planning the next leg of the journey? The traveler considered this for a long while, and slowly understood. He had spent so many years searching for a peaceful place to finally arrive, that he had never once let himself actually arrive anywhere, including the home he had left in the first place. That night, for the first time in years, he sat by his own small fire and let himself simply be home. There is a second story, often told beside this one. A young bird, raised by an anxious parent who feared the nest was never quite safe enough, never quite warm enough, spent every evening of its early life convinced that comfort was always somewhere just out of reach. A better nest, a sturdier branch, a calmer tree, always one move away. By the time it was old enough to build its own nest, it could not settle anywhere, certain each new branch was not yet the right one. An old bird nearby, watching this restless, searching for many seasons, finally said, "You are looking for the nest that will finally let you rest. But no nest does that on its own. Rest is not something a branch gives you. It is something you eventually decide to allow, wherever you happen to be sitting." The young bird, skeptical at first, finally settled one evening on an ordinary branch, no sturdier or calmer than any of the 100 others it had already rejected, and discovered, to its own surprise, that the rest it had been searching for had been available the whole time, not in the branch, but in its own willingness, finally, to stop searching and simply be there. You do not have to find the perfect circumstances before you are allowed to rest tonight. You do not have to wait until the difficult conversation is resolved, or the worry is fully settled, or some better, calmer version of your life finally arrives. You can be exactly where you are, this room, this bed, this particular unfinished day, and still, somehow, already be home enough to let your shoulders come down. This bed, however ordinary it is, can be the hearth tonight. This breath, however unremarkable, can be the fire still glowing. You do not need anything more than what is already here in order to finally come in out of the cold. Let us pause here a moment. If it helps, let yourself feel, just for now, that you have already arrived, not at some distant, better destination, but simply here, in this room, on this ordinary night, which is allowed to be enough. Let your body settle the way a tired traveler settles by a fire they have finally stopped searching past. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one last image worth sitting with for a while now, perhaps the most releasing of all the images this evening has offered. A river, moving steadily, unhurried, toward the sea. A river does not strain to reach the sea faster than it will. It does not grip the banks, or argue with the rocks in its path, or insist on a straighter, more efficient route. It simply moves, the way water has always moved, around what cannot be moved, over what can, finding, again and again, without any apparent effort, the path that leads it onward, and in time, not by force, not by struggle, simply by continuing to be what it is, it always, eventually, reaches the sea. There is something in this image worth borrowing tonight, lying here, perhaps still gripping some thread of the day you have not quite released. You do not have to force your way toward rest, the way the river does not force its way toward the sea. You only have to let yourself move the way water moves, around what cannot be changed tonight, past what does not need solving right now, trusting, the way the river trusts without ever having to think about it, that you are already moving toward where you need to be, even if it does not feel that way yet. Let us explore a story about this. Long ago, a young river, newly formed from melting snow high in the mountains, found its path blocked again and again, by boulders, by fallen trees, by narrow gorges that seemed impossible to pass through. At each obstacle, the young river grew frustrated, throwing itself again and again at whatever stood in its way, certain that enough force would eventually break through. An old, much larger river it eventually joined, having traveled far longer and far further, moved very differently. Where a boulder stood in its way, it simply curved gently around it, where the ground sloped unevenly. It found the lowest path without struggle, without insistence, without ever throwing itself against anything at all. "How do you move so easily?" the young river asked. "When I have struggled against every obstacle in my path." "I do not move against anything," the old river said. "I only ever move toward the sea, taking whatever shape the land offers me along the way. I have never once had to force my way past an obstacle. I have only ever had to keep moving, and trust that moving, eventually, finds its own way around." The young river, joining the old one, found itself moving more easily almost immediately. Not because the obstacles disappeared, but because it had stopped throwing itself against them and started simply continuing onward, the way water has always known how to do. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A young apprentice, learning to row a boat upriver against a strong current, exhausted himself within an hour, fighting the water with every stroke. An old boatman, watching, finally said, "You are not fighting the river, you are fighting yourself. Let your strokes be the size the current actually allows, not the size your frustration demands, and you will travel further with far less effort." The apprentice slowed his strokes, matched his effort to what the water actually offered, rather than what his impatience wanted, and found, within a short while, that he was moving steadily upriver after all, not by overpowering the current, but by finally working with it, instead of against it. Whatever in you tonight is still gripping, still resisting, still wishing the day had gone differently or that sleep would simply hurry up and arrive. You might let it move, instead, like that river, not forcing, not gripping, just continuing, gently, around whatever cannot be changed tonight, trusting that you are already moving toward rest. Even in moments when it does not yet feel like you are moving at all, you do not have to reach the sea by force tonight. You only have to keep being water, soft, continuing, unhurried, and trust, the way the river trusts, without ever having to decide to, that this, too, eventually, quietly, on its own time, arrives. Let us rest here together a moment. Imagine, if it helps, your own breath moving like that river, unhurried, finding its own way around whatever feels tight or resistant tonight, continuing softly towards something larger and calmer than itself. There is nothing to force, only this slow, steady moving toward rest, the way water has always moved toward the sea. When you are ready, we will continue on together. Quieter than the others so far, and it concerns a bowl, not the empty bowl from before, but a different one, a bowl that has been broken and mended and is somehow, against all expectation, more loved for having been broken at all. We carry, most of us, a quiet belief that we are only truly worthy of rest, of peace, of being cared for, once we are whole, once the mistakes are corrected, the cracks repaired invisibly, the rough places smoothed over so completely that no one, including ourselves, could ever tell they had been there. We treat our own flaws like something to hide before we can be loved, our own breaks like something to erase before we can be at peace. There is an old way of mending a broken bowl that does the opposite of hiding the break. Rather than disguising the crack, the mending makes it visible, fills it with something bright, something almost golden, so that the break becomes, quite plainly, part of the bowl's beauty, rather than a flaw it must apologize for. It is loved partly because it was. You do not have to wait until every crack in you has been smoothed away before you are allowed to rest tonight. The places where you have broken, and mended, and broken again. They are not waiting to disqualify you from peace. They might, in their own quiet way, even be part of what makes you worth resting at all. Let us explore a story about this. In a small mountain town, a potter once made a beautiful bowl for a wealthy household, only for it to slip from a servant's hands and shatter into many pieces on the stone floor. The household, embarrassed, sent the broken pieces back to the potter, expecting either a replacement or an apology. Instead, the potter spent many slow weeks mending the bowl, piece by piece, filling each crack not with ordinary glue meant to hide the damage, but with a fine golden lacquer that caught the light wherever the bowl had broken. When it was returned, the cracks were not hidden at all. They ran across the bowl like bright rivers, visible from across the room. The household, confused at first, nearly sent it back again. Until an old visitor, seeing the bowl on the table, said quietly, "This is more beautiful than it would have been if it had never broken at all." Now everyone who looks at it can see exactly what it survived, and exactly how it was cared for afterward. The bowl became, in time, the most treasured object in the house, not despite its cracks, but because of the gold that now ran through them. There is a second story, often told beside this one. An old gardener kept a small tree in his courtyard, bent and twisted by some early storm long before he had found it. Its trunk curved in a shape no straight young tree would ever have grown into on its own. Visitors sometimes suggested he replace it with a healthier, straighter tree. "This tree is not less for having survived that storm," he said. "Look how the curve of its trunk now shelters the small flowers planted beneath it, in a way no straight tree ever could. It became this particular shape because of what happened to it, and that particular shape is now exactly what makes it useful, and exactly what makes it beautiful to look at." He never once tried to straighten it. He simply let it be the shape its history had made it, and tended it carefully, exactly as it was. You do not have to be unbroken to be worth this kind of tending tonight. The places in you that have cracked and mended again. The hard year, the difficult loss, the mistake you have not quite forgiven yourself for. They are not standing between you and rest. They might be, in their own quiet way, simply part of the particular shape that makes you who you are. The same way the gold in the bowl, the same way the curve in the tree's trunk, became part of what made each of them worth caring for at all. You are allowed to rest tonight exactly as you are, not the smoothed over, never broken version of yourself you sometimes wish you could present, but the actual one, mended in places, golden in the cracks, entirely worth tending to. Let us pause here a moment. If there is some place in you that still feels broken tonight, you might, just for now, imagine a little warmth settling into that very place, not to hide it, not to erase it, just to acknowledge it gently, the way gold settles into the crack of an old, well-loved bowl. There is nothing to fix right now, only this quiet tending. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is a quieter image still, easy to overlook, and it concerns a seed, resting in dark soil, doing what looks, from the outside, like absolutely nothing at all. If you dug up a planted seed every single day to check on its progress, you would see, for a long while, no progress whatsoever, no green shoot, no visible change, nothing to suggest anything is happening beneath the surface. And yet something is happening, the whole time, in the dark, invisible, unhurried, exactly the way it is meant to happen. A seed does not need to be watched to grow. In fact, the watching, the digging, the constant checking is often the very thing that disturbs the growth most. We are not always so different, lying here at the end of a hard day, wishing we could see some visible sign that things are getting better, that the difficulty is resolving, that whatever we are working through is actually working. The absence of visible progress is so often mistaken for the absence of any progress at all. But growth, real growth, the kind that actually holds, happens mostly in the dark, mostly unseen, mostly while we are doing what looks, from the outside, like nothing, resting, breathing, simply allowing the season to do what seasons do. Let us explore a story about this. A young farmer, anxious about a poor season, planted seeds late into the autumn, and then, unable to bear the waiting, dug a small patch up every few days to check whether anything was happening beneath the soil. Each time, he found nothing, no shoot, no root yet visible, and each time, his digging disturbed the soil a little more, setting the seed back further than if he had simply left it alone. An old farmer in the next field planted at the same time and never once disturbed the soil after planting. He simply watered it when it needed water and otherwise left it entirely alone, trusting the dark and the season to do their work without his interference. By spring, the old farmer's field was full of strong, healthy shoots. The young farmer's field, dug into so many times out of impatience, struggled to produce much of anything at all. "I don't understand," the young farmer said. "I cared for my seeds. I checked on them constantly." "Caring and checking are not the same thing," the old farmer said gently. "Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for something growing is to leave it alone in the dark and trust that it knows how to grow without your watching." There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A young musician, frustrated that a difficult piece was not yet improving despite weeks of practice, complained to an old teacher that nothing seemed to be changing no matter how hard she worked. The teacher asked her to set the piece aside entirely for 2 full weeks, practicing something else instead, with no checking back on the difficult piece at all. When she finally returned to it after the 2 weeks, she found, to her surprise, that her hands moved through the difficult passage far more easily than before, not because she had practiced it during that time, but because something in her had been quietly settling it into place, unseen. The whole time she thought nothing was happening. Whatever you are working through tonight, the hard situation that does not yet feel resolved, the grief that does not yet feel lighter, the worry that has not yet loosened its grip, it may be growing, even now, in the dark, in ways you cannot yet see and do not need to see, in order for the growing to be real. You do not have to dig it up tonight to check on its progress. You are allowed to simply rest and trust the dark, the way a seed trusts the dark, without needing proof tonight that anything at all is happening. Let us rest here together a moment. Imagine, if it helps, something quietly growing in you right now, somewhere beneath the surface, unseen, unhurried, needing nothing from you tonight, except to be left undisturbed in the dark for a while. There is nothing to dig up, nothing to check on, only this trust, old and patient, that the dark is doing exactly what dark soil has always done. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is a smaller, more ordinary image still, easy to walk past without noticing. A worn path through long grass, the kind made not by any single deliberate act, but slowly, over time, by the simple repetition of many ordinary footsteps, each one unremarkable on its own. We tend to want our lives, and especially our hard seasons, to look like something dramatic, a single decisive turning point, a clear before and after, a moment where everything visibly changes. But most real change, looked at honestly, looks much more like that worn path, countless small, undramatic steps, none of which felt like progress at the time, slowly wearing away through ground that once seemed impossible to cross at all. If you feel, tonight, like you have not come far enough, like the difficulty from months ago should surely be resolved by now, like you should already be further along some path toward feeling better, it may help to remember that paths are not judged honestly from a single step. They are only visible, only real, when you finally turn and look back at how far the grass has already been worn down behind you. Let us explore a story about this. A young traveler, setting out across a wide, untouched field toward a distant village, grew discouraged within the first hour, certain that the grass ahead looked exactly as impassable as it had at the start, with no visible path forming no matter how far she walked. An old traveler walking the same field, having crossed it many times before, finally said, "You are looking ahead, where there is no path yet, instead of behind, where your own steps have already begun to wear one. The path is not waiting for you somewhere up ahead. It is forming behind you, with every step, whether you can see it yet or not." The young traveler turned and looked back, and saw, to her surprise, a faint but real line, already pressed into the grass behind her, proof, plain and undeniable, that her walking had already been doing something, even when it had felt, moment to moment, like nothing was changing at all. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. Asked by a young apprentice how the long mountain trail he tended had ever been made in the first place, said simply, "No one decided to build this trail. Sheep walked it, one ordinary day at a time, never intending to make a path, only ever taking the next small step that made sense. The trail is just what is left over after enough small, ordinary steps have been taken in roughly the same direction. You are allowed, tonight, to be in the middle of your own unfinished path, not yet arrived, not yet certain how far you have come, simply still walking it, one ordinary day at a time. You do not have to have a visible, dramatic before and after to know that something in you has been slowly, quietly changing. The path is there, behind you, worn a little deeper with each day you have already survived, whether or not you have stopped to look back and notice it. Let us pause here a moment. If it helps, you might imagine, just for now, turning around on whatever path you have been walking through your own hard season, and noticing the worn grass behind you, proof that you have already come further than it sometimes feels like. Even on days when the way ahead still looks uncertain, there is nothing to rush toward tonight, only this quiet noticing of how far you have already come. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one more image worth turning to before we begin gathering everything together, and it is, in its own way, the gentlest of the evening, stars, appearing, very slowly, in a sky that only moments before seemed entirely empty and dark. If you look up at dusk, just as the light is fading, the sky often looks bare, no stars visible yet, nothing but a deepening grey that can feel, for a few long minutes, like emptiness itself. And yet the stars are already there. They were there the whole time, even in the brightest part of the afternoon, simply outshone by a sun too bright to let them be seen. Darkness does not create the stars. It only allows what was always there to finally become visible. There is something worth borrowing from this, especially on nights when everything feels uncertain, when the future looks like nothing but bare grey sky with no visible light anywhere in it. The good things, the steadiness, the resilience, the quiet capacity to keep going that has carried you through every hard night before this one, have not actually disappeared just because you cannot see them clearly right now. They are simply waiting for enough darkness to finally be visible again, the way stars wait for enough dusk. Let us explore a story about this. A young shepherd, caught far from home as night fell faster than expected, grew afraid as the sky darkened completely, certain he had lost his way entirely in the blackness. An old shepherd traveling with him said only, "Wait, be still a moment. Let your eyes adjust, and let the sky finish what it is doing." Within a short while, as the young shepherd's eyes adjusted and the sky deepened further, stars began to appear. First one, then a scattering. Then, eventually, a great wash of light across the whole sky, far brighter and more navigable than he would have believed possible, standing in that same dark field only minutes before. "I thought the dark meant we were lost," he said. "The dark only meant we hadn't yet waited long enough to see by it," the old shepherd said. "The stars were always there. We only needed enough night to finally notice them." There is a second story, often told beside this one. A young weaver, working late into the evening on a particularly difficult pattern, grew frustrated as the light faded, certain she could no longer see well enough to continue, and that the work for the day was simply lost. An old weaver beside her lit a single small lamp, and within its narrow circle of light, the threads that had seemed impossible to distinguish in the fading dusk suddenly became clear and workable again. "I thought I had lost the light entirely," the young weaver said. "You had only lost the wrong kind of light," the old weaver said. "Sometimes, a smaller, steadier light in the dark shows you more clearly than the broad light of day ever did. Whatever darkness tonight feels like, the uncertainty about tomorrow, the absence of any clear answer, the sense that you cannot quite see your way through whatever you are facing, it may not be emptiness at all. It may simply be a darkness deep enough, finally, for something quieter and steadier in you to become visible again, the way stars become visible only once the sky has grown dark enough to show them." You only have to trust, the way the shepherd finally trusted the dark field, that the steadiness you need has not vanished. It is only waiting for enough quiet, enough stillness, enough darkness to be seen again. Let us rest here together a moment. If it helps, imagine the dark of this room not as something empty, but as something quietly full of whatever steadiness, whatever quiet resilience has carried you this far, simply waiting, the way stars wait, for enough stillness to become visible again. There is nothing you need to find right now, only this trust that it is already there. There is one more way of looking at heaviness before we begin to gather what we have walked through tonight. And it has to do with company. The quiet, often overlooked fact that almost no one has ever carried a hard season entirely alone, even when it felt, at the time, like the loneliest thing in the world. It is so easy, lying awake with some difficulty pressing on the chest, to feel as though you are the only one who has ever felt quite this tired, quite this overwhelmed, quite this unable to simply will yourself into calm. The mind, in its tiredness, tends to whisper that this particular weight is yours alone to carry, that no one else could understand it quite this way, that asking for help, or simply admitting how hard it has been, would be its own kind of failure. But this loneliness, however convincing it feels at 2 in the morning, is rarely the whole truth. Almost everyone, looked at closely enough, has had some night like this one, lying in the dark, certain they were the only person awake and burdened in a world full of people sleeping easily. The weight is real. The aloneness, more often than not, is not. Let us explore a story about this. 2 old friends, having grown up together in the same small village, set out one year on a long journey across difficult terrain, steep hills, narrow passes, more than one stretch of road where the way forward was unclear. Partway through, one of them grew exhausted and discouraged, certain he could not continue, certain that admitting this to his friend would only burden him further. He walked on in silence for 2 full days, saying nothing, growing more tired and more isolated with every quiet hour, until finally, unable to continue pretending, he confessed how heavy the journey had become for him. His friend, far from being burdened by this, simply nodded and said, "I have been struggling too, this whole stretch. I didn't want to slow you down by saying so." They discovered, within minutes of finally speaking honestly, that they had each spent 2 exhausting days carrying their tiredness alone, in silence, certain the other was managing easily, when in truth, they had both simply been too quiet to say what was actually happening. From that point on, they walked the rest of the journey speaking honestly about the hard stretches, and found, again and again, that naming the difficulty out loud somehow made it lighter to carry, even when nothing about the road itself had changed. There is a second story, often told beside this one. A young weaver, struggling for many months with a particularly difficult pattern, worked alone late into every evening, convinced that admitting her struggle to the other weavers in the village would mean admitting she was simply not skilled enough for the work. She grew more isolated and more discouraged with each passing week. One evening, exhausted, she finally mentioned her struggle to an older weaver she had long admired, expecting to be told, gently, that perhaps weaving was not for her. Instead, the older woman laughed warmly and said, "That exact pattern took me nearly a year to manage, when I was your age. I never told anyone either, certain I should already know how. We were both being quiet about the same ordinary difficulty, all this time." The young weaver discovered, in that moment, that the struggle she had been so ashamed of was simply part of how the craft is learned by nearly everyone who has ever tried it, and that her silence, more than the difficulty itself, had been the loneliest part of the whole experience. Whatever you are carrying tonight, you are very unlikely to be the only person who has ever carried something like it. Somewhere, in some other room, in some other dark, someone else has lain awake with this same particular flavor of tiredness, this same quiet worry, this same difficulty falling asleep at the end of a long day. You do not have to know who they are, or speak to them, or even believe it fully right now, for it to be true. You are not as alone in this as the tired late hour sometimes convinces you that you are. Let us pause here a moment. If it helps, you might imagine, just for now, some quiet companionship in the dark with you. Not someone solving anything for you, just someone else, somewhere, who has also lain awake like this, who would understand exactly this tiredness, without needing it explained. You are not walking this particular night entirely alone, even in the quiet of an empty room. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one final image worth sitting with, before we begin to gather the evening together, and it concerns patience. The particular, unhurried patience of a craftsperson who has learned, slowly, that some things simply cannot be rushed without ruining them. An old arrow maker, it is sometimes said, spends far longer selecting and straightening a single piece of wood than a hurried worker would think reasonable, turning it slowly over a low fire, checking its straightness again and again, setting it aside to rest before working it further, never forcing the wood to bend faster than the wood itself is willing to bend. A hurried arrow, made in haste, flies crooked. A patient one, made slowly, flies true, healing, of almost any kind, from a hard day, from a harder season, from grief or worry or simple exhaustion, tends to work the same way. It cannot be rushed into being finished, simply because we are tired of waiting for it to be finished. The wood bends in its own time, or it splinters. The heart settles in its own time, or it stays tense from being forced. Let us explore a story about this. A young arrow maker, eager to finish enough arrows quickly to be paid for a large order, rushed his work, bending each shaft as fast as it would go, forcing the wood past where it wanted to bend. Many of his arrows cracked outright. The ones that survived flew poorly, veering off course no matter how carefully he aimed them. An old arrow maker working beside him, taking far longer over each piece, produced fewer arrows in the same time, but every one of them flew straight and true. "I am not slower, because I am careless with my time," he told the young man. "I am slower, because the wood tells me how fast it can bend, and I have learned, finally, to listen to it, instead of to my own impatience." The young arrow maker, watching this, began to slow his own work, checking each piece more carefully, allowing the wood to rest between bendings, rather than forcing it through in one impatient motion. His arrows, slowly, began to fly straighter, even though it now took him noticeably longer to make each one. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A young potter, frustrated that a particular bowl kept warping in the kiln, no matter how carefully she shaped it, finally asked an old potter what she was doing wrong. "You are not doing anything wrong with your hands," the old potter said. "You are only rushing the drying. Clay needs time to release its own moisture slowly, in its own time, or it cracks under the heat later. You cannot dry it faster by wanting it dry faster." She began leaving her pieces to dry for far longer than felt comfortable, resisting the urge to move them into the kiln before they were ready. And her bowls, from that point on, held their shape. Whatever in you is still healing tonight, the hard day, the harder season, the grief or worry that has not yet finished settling, you do not have to force it to be finished, simply because you are tired of carrying it, unfinished. It is allowed to bend at its own pace, the way good wood bends, the way good clay dries, in its own unhurried time, rather than the time your impatience demands of it. Let us rest here together a moment. If there is something in you still being shaped, still being straightened, still resting before its next bending, you might let it rest a while longer tonight, without forcing it towards some finished state before it is ready. There is nothing to rush, only this old, patient trust that what is healing at exactly the pace it needs to. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is one more weight worth naming gently before we begin to gather the evening together. And it is a particular kind of heaviness, the weight of a grudge, an old resentment, a hurt that has not yet been set down even though the original moment passed long ago. Holding on to a hurt can feel, at first, like a kind of protection, as though staying angry somehow keeps us safe from being hurt again, or somehow makes the other person responsible for our discomfort, until they finally apologize properly. rarely punishes the person who caused it. It mostly just sits in the one still carrying it, taking up room that could otherwise be used for rest. This does not mean every hurt must be forgiven tonight, or that what happened did not matter, or that you owe anyone an instant release of something that took real time to build. It only means noticing, gently, whether you are still carrying a particular weight out of true necessity, or simply out of old habit. The way the traveler from earlier in the evening carried her stone long after she had any real reason to. Let us explore a story about this. Two old rivals, who had once been close friends, before some long-forgotten disagreement split them apart, lived for many years afterward in the same small village without speaking. Each carried the old hurt carefully, certain the other was entirely to blame, certain that speaking first would mean admitting some defeat. One winter, both fell ill within the same season, and an old healer who tended to each of them separately finally said to one of them, "You have told me the whole story of what happened between you. Do you remember, now, exactly what started it?" The man thought for a long while and realized, to his own surprise, that the details had grown hazy with time. He remembered the hurt far more clearly than the actual cause of it. "I suppose I have mostly been carrying the hurt itself," he admitted, "more than the reason for it." That spring, hesitantly, he visited his old friend and found the other man had reached, separately, almost the very same realization. They did not need a long conversation to set the weight down. They simply sat together by a fire, as they once had, years before, and let the old resentment settle the way muddy water settles when it is finally left undisturbed. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A young woman, deeply hurt by something her sister had said many years before, found that thinking of her sister still brought a tight, familiar anger each time, even though the original conversation had happened so long ago that her sister barely remembered it at all. An old aunt, hearing her speak of it once again, said gently, "You have told me this story many times now. I notice your sister is not in the room for any of those tellings. The only one still in that old conversation is you." The young woman sat with this for a long while and slowly began to notice how much of her own present peace she had been spending on a conversation that, for everyone else involved, had ended years ago. You do not have to forgive everything tonight, or pretend an old hurt did not matter. But you might ask, gently, whether some particular weight you are still carrying is being held out of true, present necessity, or simply out of old habit, the way a hand stays clenched long after there is anything left to hold on to. If there is a resentment you are willing to set down tonight, even just for tonight, even just to pick back up tomorrow if you truly need it, you are allowed to let it rest, just for these few hours, beside the bed, instead of against your chest. Let us pause here a moment. If there is an old hurt sitting with you tonight, you might, just for now, imagine setting it gently to one side, not gone, not resolved, just resting, the way the stone rested beside the road, the way the muddy water rested on its shelf. There is nothing you need to decide about it tonight. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one more small, ordinary image worth sitting with before we gather the evening together, and it has nothing dramatic about it at all. A parent, sitting quietly beside a small child who has simply asked to be near them, with nothing further required of either one. A small child, in moments like this, does not ask the parent to perform, to entertain, to solve anything, to be impressive in any way. The child only wants the parent there, present, nearby, unhurried. And that simple presence, with nothing added to it, is somehow entirely enough. No one in that quiet room is being asked to achieve anything. They are only being asked to be there, together, for a little while. You are allowed, tonight, to offer yourself that same simple permission. You do not have to perform calm. You do not have to achieve sleep through any particular impressive effort. You only have to be here, present, in this room, in this body. The way that child simply sits beside the parent, asking for nothing more complicated than presence itself. Let us explore a story about this. A young mother, exhausted after a long day, sat down beside her small daughter at bedtime, worried she had no energy left to tell a proper story or offer any of the usual bedtime rituals she felt she should provide. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't have a story in me tonight." Her daughter simply leaned against her shoulder and said, "That's okay. Can you just stay?" Surprised by how little had actually been asked of her, simply sat there, saying nothing, doing nothing remarkable at all, until her daughter drifted off to sleep beside her, not because of any story, not because of any particular skillful parenting, but simply because someone she trusted had stayed nearby while she rested. There is a second story, often told beside this one. An old teacher, asked by a worried student how to comfort someone in deep grief when there seemed to be no right words to offer, said simply, "Most of the time, the right words are not actually required. Sit beside them, say little. Let your presence do what words cannot." People remember far more often who stayed than what was said. You are not required, tonight, to say the perfect thing to yourself, or perform the correct ritual of rest, or achieve any particular impressive state of calm. You are only asked, gently, to stay, present in this body, in this room, in this one ordinary night, the way a parent simply stays beside a child who has asked for nothing more than that. Your presence, exactly as tired and ordinary as it is tonight, is entirely enough. Let us rest here together a moment. If it helps, let yourself simply stay, right where you are, without needing to perform anything further for tonight. Not a better mood, not a clearer mind, not a more impressive kind of calm. Just stay, the way you would stay beside someone who only asked you to be near. When you are ready, we will continue on together. There is a small, plain image worth holding before we gather everything together tonight. A single candle, lit beside a bed, asked to do nothing more than light the small space immediately around it. A candle does not apologize for failing to light the whole room. It does not strain to reach the far corners, or feel inadequate for only illuminating the small circle close to where it sits. It simply does the one small thing it can actually do. Light this near space, warmly, completely. And that one small thing turns out to be entirely enough for whoever is sitting close enough to see by it. We often hold ourselves to a much larger standard than this. We feel we should be solving the whole dark room of our lives tonight. Every worry, every unresolved difficulty, every uncertain tomorrow. All at once, all by morning. You are only asked to be this one small candle, lighting this one small space, for this one ordinary night. That is not a lesser kind of effort. It may be the only kind that was ever actually being asked of you. Let us explore a story about this. A young monk, newly responsible for the evening lighting in a large temple hall, grew discouraged each night at how much of the great room remained dark, no matter how many candles he lit. "No matter what I do," he told an old teacher, "most of this hall stays in darkness." The old teacher walked him slowly around the room, pointing to each small circle of warm light, where a candle burned. "Look only at what each candle is actually doing," he said. "This one is warming a hand that was cold. This one is letting an old woman read a worn letter she has read 100 times before. This one is simply company for whoever sits near it tonight. None of them were ever responsible for the whole hall, only for their own small circle. The young monk, looking at the room differently after that, stopped measuring his candles against the size of the darkness, and started measuring them, instead, against the small, real warmth each one actually offered. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A traveler, lost on a dark road, despaired at how little a single small lantern could show him. Only a few steps ahead, nothing more. An old guide walking with him said, "You do not need to see the whole road tonight. You only need to see the next few steps. The lantern will show you those, and when you reach them, it will show you the next few after that." The whole road has never once needed to be visible all at once for a traveler to eventually arrive. You are not required tonight to solve the whole dark room of your life, or light every uncertain stretch of road ahead all at once. You are only asked to be this one small candle, for this one small space, for this one ordinary night, and that is enough. It has always, quietly, been enough. Let us pause here a moment. If it helps, imagine yourself as exactly that small, sufficient light, not responsible for the whole dark house, just warming this one small space, this one bed, this one breath, for tonight. There is nothing more required of you right now. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one final image worth turning to before we begin gathering the evening together, and it concerns a pilgrim standing at a crossroads, uncertain which path to take, feeling as though the not knowing itself is some kind of failure. So many of the heaviest nights are not about any single hard thing that has already happened, but about an unresolved question still waiting somewhere ahead. Which way to go? What to decide? How to handle something that has not yet arrived? The mind, faced with this uncertainty, often insists that the not knowing must be solved immediately, tonight, before any rest can be allowed. But a crossroads, looked at plainly, does not require an instant decision in the middle of the night. The paths will still be there in the morning, exactly as they are now, neither one growing more urgent, simply because you have stayed awake worrying over them in the dark. Sleep does not close any door that was open this evening. It only postpones the choosing until a clearer hour, when the choosing will likely be easier anyway. Let us explore a story about this. A young pilgrim, arriving at a crossroads as evening fell, grew anxious that she could not yet tell which of the two paths led toward the village she sought. Determined to decide before dark, she paced back and forth between them for hours, growing more exhausted and more confused with every passing minute, certain that choosing wrongly tonight would somehow be disastrous. An old traveler resting nearby finally said, "Sit down, eat something. Sleep here tonight. In the morning, with rested eyes, you will see the markers on these paths, far more clearly than you can see them now." Exhausted, in the dark, she resisted at first, certain that resting would only waste time she could not afford to lose. But eventually, too tired to keep pacing, she lay down where she was and slept. She saw immediately what she had been unable to see the night before. A small, plain marker indicating exactly which path led where she needed to go, a marker that had been there the whole time, simply invisible in the dark and the exhaustion. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A young apprentice, unable to decide between two approaches to a difficult piece of work, stayed up half the night agonizing over which to choose, certain that choosing wrongly would ruin everything. An old craftsman, finding him still awake near dawn, said only, "Sleep first, decide after." A tired mind rarely makes a better choice than a rested one, no matter how long it stays awake trying. The apprentice slept, reluctantly, and in the clearer light of morning, the right approach seemed almost obvious. Not because anything about the work had changed overnight, but because he was finally able to see it without the fog of exhaustion clouding every option. Whatever crossroads is waiting for you tonight, the decision not yet made, the uncertain path ahead, the question you feel you should already have answered, you do not have to solve it now, in the dark, exhausted, with nothing but worry to guide you. The paths will hold their place until morning. The markers, however invisible they seem tonight, will likely be far easier to see with rested eyes than with tired, anxious ones. You are allowed to sleep first and decide after. Let us rest here together a moment. If there is a decision sitting unresolved with you tonight, you might let it wait now, just for these few hours, not abandoned, simply postponed until a clearer, more rested time. The crossroads will still be there in the morning. Nothing is being lost by resting before you choose. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one last image worth sitting with before we begin gathering tonight together, and it concerns a loom, and the particular pattern a weaver is working on, seen from too close to make any sense of it at all. If you stand close enough to a loom while a complicated pattern is being woven, you will see, mostly, a confusing tangle of single threads, crossing and recrossing in ways that seem to have no order, no clear direction, certainly nothing you would call a picture, only from a distance. Once enough threads have been laid down and the work has had time to accumulate, does any recognizable pattern finally emerge. The weaver, working up close, thread by thread, often cannot see the whole picture either, not because she is doing anything wrong, but because that is simply how the work looks, from where the work actually happens. Your own life, looked at from inside a single difficult day, can feel exactly this confusing. Single threads of worry and effort and small disappointment, crossing in ways that seem to add up to nothing at all. This does not mean no pattern is forming. It only means you are standing, as everyone always stands while they are living it, far too close to see the whole cloth. Let us explore a story about this. A young weaver, partway through a long and difficult commission, grew discouraged at how little sense her work made up close. Threads of deep blue crossing threads of pale grey, in a way that looked, from where she sat, like nothing more than a tangle. She nearly unravelled the whole piece, certain she had made some terrible error somewhere along the way. An old weaver, passing through the workshop, asked her to step back from the loom entirely, all the way to the far wall, and look again. From that distance, the tangle resolved, suddenly and completely, into the clear, deliberate shape of a mountain range at dawn. Blue and grey, exactly where they needed to be. I could not see it, the young weaver said, astonished. Even though my own hands made every single thread. No one can, the old weaver said. We are always too close to our own work to see its shape while we are still making it. That is not a flaw in the work. It is simply the nature of weaving anything worth weaving. There is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A traveller, climbing a long mountain trail, grew discouraged partway up at how little progress the switchbacks seemed to be making. Each turn appearing to lead nowhere in particular, doubling back almost on itself. An old guide, walking ahead, finally stopped at a wide overlook and pointed back down the mountain. From there, the seemingly aimless switchbacks revealed themselves as the only sensible way up a slope too steep to climb directly. Every confusing turn, exactly where it needed to be. It never looked like progress while I was making it, the traveller said. Most progress doesn't, the guide said. Not from inside it. Whatever feels like a tangle tonight, the parts of your life that do not yet seem to add up to anything, the single threads of effort that seem, up close, to be crossing without purpose. You do not have to see the whole pattern tonight in order to trust where that one is forming. The shape is not your job to see clearly from here. It is only your job, for tonight, to lay down this one thread, this one ordinary day, and trust the distance to do, eventually, what distance has always done for every other weaver who ever felt this same confusion up close. Let us pause here a moment, before we gather everything else together. If it helps, you might imagine stepping back now, just slightly, from whatever tangle today left you with. Not solving it, not understanding it fully, just allowing some distance between you and it, the way the young weaver finally stepped back from her loom. There is nothing to untangle tonight, only this quiet trust that a pattern is already forming, even from this close, even when it cannot yet be seen. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one more image worth resting with, before we let everything else settle, and it has to do with roots, the part of a tree, or of a life, that almost no one ever sees, and that does almost all of the real work. When you look at a tree, what you are looking at, mostly, is the part that is easiest to see, the trunk, the branches, the leaves moving a little in whatever wind happens to be passing through. What you are not looking at, because it is hidden entirely beneath the ground, is the much larger, much quieter structure of roots, holding the whole thing upright, drawing up whatever water and nourishment the tree needs simply to keep being a tree at all. The roots get none of the credit. No one admires a tree for its roots, and yet without them, none of the rest of it, the height, the shade, the leaves catching afternoon light, would be possible for even a single day. Something in you may recognize this. So much of what actually holds a person upright through a hard season is exactly this kind of work, unseen, uncredited, happening below the surface where no one, including you, is watching closely enough to notice it happening. The small, steadying habits no one else knows about. The private moments of choosing, again, not to give up on a day that gave you very little reason to keep going. None of this shows above the ground. All of it, very likely, is the only reason you are still standing at all. Let us enter a story about this. An old farmer, asked once by a curious traveler why his orchard survived a season of drought that destroyed every orchard around it, said simply that his trees had been planted slowly, many years before, and made to struggle a little in their early seasons, watered less often than seemed kind, so that their roots, searching for what they needed, would grow deep into the ground, rather than spreading wide and shallow near the surface where water is easy to find but never reliable. It looked, for those first years, like I was neglecting them, the farmer said. Other farmers thought I was making a mistake. But a tree with shallow roots looks healthy in easy seasons and dies in hard ones. A tree with deep roots sometimes looks like it is struggling in easy seasons, and then it is the only tree left standing when the hard season finally comes. The traveler asked whether the trees had known, somehow, that the drought was coming, to grow such deep roots in preparation. The farmer shook his head. They didn't grow deep roots because they knew about the drought. They grew deep roots because that is simply what roots do, given enough time and enough small daily difficulty to grow through. The depth wasn't a prediction, it was only ever a consequence. There is a second story, gentler, that is often told alongside this one. A grandmother, watching her granddaughter cry over a friendship that had quietly ended, did not try to explain the friendship away or tell the girl it didn't matter. Instead, she walked her out to the garden, to a tree planted the year the girl was born, and asked her to try to push it over. Laughing despite her tears, and of course nothing happened. The tree did not so much as sway. You couldn't move it, the grandmother said, not because the tree is stronger than you, in the ways you can see. It's because of everything happening below the ground, where neither of us can look. All those years it was growing roots you never noticed, because there was nothing interesting to look at from up here. The roots were the whole reason it could survive your push, and every storm before it, and every storm still coming. You have been growing roots too, this whole time, in places no one can see. Whatever today asked of you, whatever quiet, uncelebrated effort it took, simply to keep going, to get through a hard conversation, to manage a long stretch of tiredness without any applause for managing it. None of that effort was wasted simply because no one saw it happen. Roots do not need to be seen to be real. They do not need anyone's recognition to be doing exactly what they were always doing. Whatever has held you upright through difficult seasons before tonight is very likely still there, deeper now than it was, quietly doing the same patient work it has always done, whether or not you have ever once stopped to notice it. Let us pause here together for a moment. You might let your attention drop now, gently, down past whatever is visible on the surface of today, the tiredness, the small unresolved worries, the parts of the day that didn't go quite the way you hoped, down toward whatever has been quietly growing beneath all of it this whole time, unseen and uncelebrated, and entirely real. There is nothing to dig up tonight, nothing to inspect or prove, only this quiet trust that the roots are there, doing their patient work, exactly as they always have. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one last small image before we gather everything together, and it concerns a fish, and the particular kind of ease that comes only from being exactly where you belong. A fish moving through water does not struggle against the water the way a person might struggle, wading against a strong current. It does not fight its element. It simply moves, and the water, being its element, moves with it, almost effortlessly, in a way that would be impossible anywhere else. On dry ground, the same fish is suddenly clumsy, gasping, completely out of its depth in every sense. The difference is not the fish's effort or skill. The difference, entirely, is whether it is in the place it was made for. Many of the nights that feel hardest are nights spent, in one way or another, like a fish out of its element, forcing yourself through a shape of living that was never quite suited to you, straining at something that asks more of you than it was ever going to give back. And many of the nights that feel easiest, by contrast, even when they are still difficult nights, are nights spent somewhere closer to your own element, among people who know you, doing whatever small thing it is that actually fits the shape of who you are, however ordinary that thing might look from outside. An old story tells of a young fish, raised for a time in a shallow ornamental pond, who grew thin and listless despite plenty of food, until an old fisherman finally returned it to the river it had been taken from as a hatchling. Within days it was strong again, moving easily through currents the pond had never had. "I fed it well," the pond's keeper said, confused. "Feeding is not the same as belonging," the fisherman answered. "Some kinds of thinness can only be cured by water that actually moves the way that creature was made to move through it. This is not a suggestion that you must overhaul your whole life tonight, or solve, at this hour, the question of where you truly belong. It is only an invitation to notice, gently, without judgment, where in your life you feel most like the fish in the river, and where you feel most like the fish in the shallow pond, and to trust that this noticing, carried quietly, might in time lead you a little closer to your own water, the way it leads almost everyone, eventually, who is patient enough to keep noticing. Let us pause here once more, before we gather everything together. If it helps, you might imagine, just for a moment, the ease of moving through water that was actually made for you, not forcing, not straining, simply moving, the way you were always meant to move through, at least some part of your life. There is nothing to change about tonight, only this quiet permission to imagine that ease, and to trust it is somewhere within reach, even if you have not yet found your way fully back to it. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is one more small thought worth sitting with, before we let the rest of it gather together, and it concerns an empty room, and the quiet difference between absence and silence. Many people, walking into a room with nothing happening in it, no conversation, no task underway, nothing visibly occurring, feel a kind of unease, as though something is missing, as though the emptiness itself is a problem waiting to be solved. But an empty room is not actually empty in the way that word usually suggests. It is full of light, however dim, full of air, quietly moving, full of the particular stillness that only an unoccupied room ever holds. A stillness that disappears the moment anyone walks back in. The room was never lacking anything. It was simply resting, the way rooms do, between one use and the next. The same is often true of an empty stretch of time in your own life. An evening with nothing planned. A quiet hour with no task waiting to fill it. The unstructured space just before sleep, like this one. It can feel, at first, like absence, like something that ought to be filled with some activity or other before it counts as worthwhile. But an empty hour, looked at differently, is not a void to be filled. It is simply a room in your day with nothing happening in it on purpose. And that, in itself, is not a problem in need of solving. It may in fact be exactly what a tired mind has been quietly asking for all day. Let us enter a story about this. A young monk, newly arrived at a quiet temple, grew restless during the long unstructured hours between meals and chores, certain that something useful ought to be happening, and unsure what to do with himself when nothing was. He asked an old monk how the older residents managed to sit so calmly through hours, with nothing scheduled in them at all. "You are looking at the empty hours as though something is missing from them," the old monk said. "Try looking at them instead, as though something has finally been taken away. All the noise, all the demands, all the small obligations that usually fill a day to its edges. What's left isn't an empty room. It's a room finally cleared enough to notice what was always quietly there, underneath all the noise. Your own breath, your own thoughts settling. The simple fact of being alive in a particular body on a particular evening. None of that requires filling. It only requires noticing." There is a second, briefer story often told beside this one. A traveler, staying for the first time in a sparsely furnished guest house, complained to the innkeeper that the room felt unfinished, almost bare, lacking the comforts he was used to. The innkeeper, an old woman who had run the guest house for many years, told him to wait a few nights before deciding. By the third night, the traveler admitted he had slept better in the bare room than he had in years, in rooms crowded with furniture and ornament. "An empty room asks nothing of you," the innkeeper said. "It is the easiest kind of room to actually rest in. This quiet, unscheduled stretch of time you are in right now, this last little while before sleep, with nothing left to do and nowhere left to be, is not an absence either. It is not a gap in your day that ought to have been filled with one more useful thing. It is simply a room finally cleared of its usual noise, and you are allowed, completely, to sit in it exactly as it is, without needing to bring anything else into it at all." Let us pause here together once more. You might imagine, just for these few remaining minutes, that the quiet around you right now is not absence but space, cleared, on purpose, for nothing more than this: your own breath, your own body, settling a little further into rest with each one. There is nothing missing from this moment. There is only this much room, finally, with nothing in it asking anything of you. When you are ready, we will go on together. We have walked through a good many images and stories tonight, and perhaps, by now, some of them have already begun to blur together a little in your tired mind, the way the edges of a long day always blur a little by the time night finally arrives. That blurring is not a problem. It is, in its own way, exactly what is supposed to happen. Let us gather them together now, gently, the way you might gather scattered tools at the end of a long day's work, not urgently, not with any need to sort them perfectly, just enough to see, for a moment, how they were always part of the same one task. There is a story sometimes told of an old woman who lived alone in a small house near a harbor, who never once, in all the years her neighbors had known her, seemed to be in any particular hurry, and never once seemed to be carrying anything heavier than she could manage. No one had ever taught her any of the old teachings by name. She had simply lived long enough, and lost enough, and rested enough, to arrive at all of them on her own, without realizing she was doing anything special at all. She woke each morning without rushing the day to begin, the way a beginner meets each new day fresh, with no fixed idea yet of how it should go. She tended a small garden behind her house, pulling only the weeds that truly needed pulling, and otherwise leaving it alone to grow in its own unhurried time, trusting the soil the way the old gardener trusted his. When the well water she drew each morning came up cloudy from the night settling, she simply let it sit a while on her windowsill, rather than stirring it harder, and by the time she needed it, it had cleared on its own, the way it always had. She kept one bowl in her kitchen that she never filled completely, leaving it always a little open for whatever the day might bring her way. A neighbor's extra vegetables, a piece of fruit from the market, whatever small thing arrived that she had not planned for. When she drank her tea in the evening, she drank it slowly, with both hands around the cup, paying it the kind of full attention most people save only for larger things, as though the tea itself were the whole of the evening's business, and nothing else needed attending to at the same time. She kept, on a shelf by her door, a bowl that had once broken many years before, mended now with a bright golden seam running through it, displayed rather than hidden, because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that the mending was at least as beautiful as the bowl had ever been whole. When old grudges from years past crossed her mind, as they sometimes still did, she let them rest a while, rather than gripping them, the same way she let the muddy water rest, trusting that most resentments settle on their own if simply left long enough undisturbed. In the evenings, when a knock came at her door, and it often did, from neighbors needing a place to sit, travelers needing a meal, children needing somewhere warm to wait out a storm, she opened it without hesitation, the way you might welcome any guest, even an unexpected feeling, in from the cold. She lit a single lamp each night, not because she expected anyone in particular to need it, but because the night was dark and a lit lamp costs little to offer. She called her own small house home, fully, completely, without waiting for some better house to arrive first, the same way the traveler eventually stopped searching and finally sat by his own fire. In hard seasons, and she had certainly had her share of those, losses and disappointments enough to fill several long lives, she did not force herself toward feeling better, faster than she actually felt. She let herself move like the river moves, around what could not be changed, finding, in her own unhurried time, the way onward, trusting that she was already moving toward calmer water, even on the days it did not feel that way at all. When a storm came through the harbor, she watched it from her window, the way the mountain watches weather, calm beneath the noise, trusting some old, unshaken place in herself, that the storm, loud as it was, could not actually reach. She did not check constantly on whatever in her own life was still healing, the way the young farmer dug up his seeds out of impatience. She simply trusted the dark, the way good soil is trusted, and let things grow at whatever pace they actually needed to grow. On nights when no visible progress seemed to have been made, she did not assume nothing was happening. She had lived long enough to know that the most important growing rarely shows itself right away. She did not look at her own worn path through life and feel behind for not having arrived somewhere more impressive by now. She simply kept walking it, one ordinary day at a time, trusting, the way the shepherd trusted, that a path is made of nothing more dramatic than enough small steps taken in roughly the same direction. On the darkest nights, when nothing ahead seemed visible at all, she waited, the way the young shepherd waited, for her eyes to adjust, and trusted that whatever steadiness she needed had not vanished, only dimmed for a while, the way stars dim against a bright sky, and reappear once the light fades enough to show them. She did not carry her hard seasons entirely alone. Even on the nights it would have been easiest to believe she was the only one awake and burdened in a quiet world. She spoke honestly, when she needed to the old friends who had walked beside her for so many years, and let their company lighten what silence alone would only have made heavier. And when something in her life was still being shaped, a grief not yet settled, a decision not yet ready, she let it take the time it needed, the way good wood takes the time it needs to bend without splintering, trusting that what heals well rarely heals quickly. No one ever saw what held her upright through her hardest years, because almost none of it happened anywhere visible. Long before anyone in the harbor knew her name, she had already spent a great many quiet seasons, growing whatever it is that lets a person keep standing through weather that flattens others. And by the time the harder storms finally came, whatever she had grown without meaning to was simply already there, deep enough to hold, the way roots are always already there, doing their unseen work, long before anyone thinks to ask how the tree is still standing. She never went looking for credit for any of it, because she had long since stopped expecting the part that matters most to be the part anyone notices. She had also, somewhere along the way, without ever making a deliberate decision about it, found her own particular water, the small harbor life that fit her the way river water fits a fish, without strain, without the constant low effort of forcing herself into a shape that never quite suited her. It was not a grand life, by most measures. It was simply hers, suited to her the way a single element suits a single creature, and she moved through her ordinary days inside it, with an ease that had very little to do with the days themselves being easy, and everything to do with finally being somewhere she actually belonged. She did not measure her single lamp against the size of the whole dark world, feeling she had failed for only lighting one small corner of it. She let her one candle be exactly what a candle is for, warming one small space, completely, for whoever happened to be near it that night. And on the rare evenings when some real decision waited unresolved, she let herself sleep first, and decide after, trusting, the way every tired traveler eventually learns to trust, that a rested mind finds its way far more easily than an exhausted one ever could. None of this made her remarkable, in the way the word is usually meant. She would have been surprised, probably, to hear it described this way at all. She was not trying to embody anything. She had simply lived long enough, through enough hard nights and ordinary days, to arrive, quietly, at something many people spend a great deal of effort trying to reach on purpose. An unforced, unhurried way of meeting whatever the day brought her, without needing it to be different than it was, and without needing herself to be anything other than tired, sometimes, at the end of an ordinary day. You already have everything in you that she had, not because you have necessarily lived as long, or lost as much, but because none of what she had was ever something rare or hard to come by. It was only ever this, a willingness to set things down instead of gripping them, to let things settle instead of stirring them, to rest without first demanding to have earned it, to trust the dark a little, to let the path be made one ordinary step at a time. You have been practicing pieces of this your whole life, whether you noticed it or not, every time you have ever set down a worry, however briefly, and slept anyway. Tonight does not require you to have mastered any of it. It only asks you to let yourself rest the way she rested, not because every difficulty had been solved, but because the difficulties, real as they were never actually required to be solved before the resting could begin. Before we close, there is one more small thing worth saying, gently, about everything left unfinished tonight. The conversation not yet had, the task not yet completed, the version of today you wish had gone differently but did not. There is an old habit many of us carry, of needing a day to feel complete before we are allowed to rest from it. Every task checked off, every loose thread tied neatly, every conversation resolved to a satisfying close. But very few days, looked at honestly, ever end this way. Most days end mid-sentence, in some sense, with something still unfinished, something still slightly undone, simply because that is what an ordinary, living day tends to look like. An unfinished day is not a failed one. It is only an ordinary one, the same shape every other day before it has taken, the same shape every day after it will likely take as well. You are allowed to leave a day exactly as unfinished as it actually is, and rest anyway. The way a craftsperson sets down half-finished work at the end of a long day, trusting it will still be there, exactly as left, ready to be picked up again whenever the next working day begins. Let us explore a story about this. An old carpenter, known for fine, careful work, never once finished a project in a single sitting, no matter how simple it seemed. Each evening, regardless of how much remained undone. He set down his tools at the same hour, covered his half-finished work with a cloth, and went home to rest. A young apprentice, eager to finish quickly, often worked late into the night trying to complete pieces the old carpenter had calmly left half done. "Doesn't it bother you," the apprentice asked one evening, "to leave it so unfinished?" "The wood is not going anywhere," the old carpenter said. "It will be exactly this unfinished tomorrow morning, as it is tonight. My only worry would be if I tried to finish it now, exhausted, and made some careless cut I would regret in the morning. Unfinished work rests easily. Careless work does not." The apprentice, watching this for many seasons, gradually learned to set his own tools down at the same hour, trusting, as the old carpenter did, that the unfinished pieces of any single day are simply waiting, patiently, exactly where they were left. For whenever there is rested energy to return to them, there is a second story, briefer, often told beside this one. A young writer, frustrated at leaving a difficult passage unresolved each night before sleep, complained to an old teacher that she could not rest with so much left undone in her work. "Do you finish every meal in one bite?" the teacher asked. "Do you read every book in one sitting? Some things are only ever done a little at a time. The unfinished passage is not behind. It is simply at the particular point a normal pace would have brought it to by this hour. Whatever you are leaving unfinished tonight, the hard conversation, the unsettled worry, the task only halfway done, you are allowed to set it down exactly as unfinished as it is, and trust, the way the old carpenter trusted, that it will still be there tomorrow, exactly where you left it, ready to be picked up again, once you are rested enough to return to it carefully." Let us pause here a moment. If it helps, you might imagine covering today's unfinished things with a soft cloth, the way the old carpenter covered his half-finished work each evening, not abandoning it, just letting it rest until morning, alongside you. When you are ready, we will go on together. When you are ready, however dark the room feels right now, however far off morning seems, the first light has never once, in the whole history of every night that has ever passed, failed to arrive. You do not have to do anything to make the dawn come. It does not require your effort, your worry, or your wakeful watching through the night to ensure it arrives on schedule. It comes on its own, exactly as it always has, regardless of how the night went, regardless of whether you slept well or poorly, regardless of whatever was left unfinished or unresolved when the dark first settled in. The sun has never once needed permission or proof of a well-managed night before it rose again. Let us explore a small story about this, the last one of the evening. A young watchman, assigned to keep vigil through a long, difficult night during a hard season in his village, grew exhausted near dawn, certain that if he closed his eyes even for a moment, the morning might somehow fail to come without his watching for it. An old watchman, finishing many years of the same duty, finally told him, "Sleep a while if you need to. The sun has risen every single morning of my long life. On nights I watched carefully, and on nights I slept through entirely. It has never once depended on me." The young watchman, reluctant at first, finally allowed himself to rest, and woke, some hours later, to exactly the dawn he had feared might not come without his vigilance, arriving, as it always had, simply because that is what mornings do. You do not have to stay awake to make sure tomorrow arrives. You do not have to solve everything tonight to earn the next day's light. It is coming regardless, the way it has come after every hard night before this one, the way it will come after every hard night still ahead. to rest now, and let the morning take care of arriving on its own, exactly as it always has. We have walked a long way together tonight, further, perhaps, than it felt like at any single moment along the way, through a stone set down beside a road, through water left alone to clear, through a cup poured too full, and a cup left open and ready, through clouds passing across a sky that never once needed to be any different beneath them, through an empty bowl, and a warm cup of tea, and a garden left to grow at its own unhurried pace. We sat for a while with a mountain that did not flinch beneath its storms, and a door opened gently to whatever had been knocking, and a small lamp lit for no reason except that the night was dark and someone tired might need it. We sat by a hearth that did not require anything finished or resolved before it was allowed to warm us, and watched a river move, unforced, around whatever stood in its way, trusting the sea was still ahead, even when it could not yet be seen. We looked, too, at a bowl that had broken once, and was mended now, with something bright running through the crack, and a seed resting in dark soil, doing the quiet, invisible work that all real growing seems to require. We noticed a worn path, made of nothing more remarkable than many small, ordinary steps, and stars that had been there in the sky the whole time, simply waiting for enough darkness to be seen again. We remembered, too, that very few people have ever carried a hard season entirely alone, however lonely it felt at the time, and that healing of almost any kind takes the particular, unhurried pace that healing has always taken, regardless of how tired we are of waiting for it. We set down, if only for tonight, an old resentment or two, and let ourselves simply stay, present, beside our own tired selves, the way you might stay beside someone who only asked you to be near. We let one small candle be enough, without demanding it light the whole dark house. We let a crossroads wait until morning, trusting a rested mind to choose more easily than an exhausted one ever could. We thought, too, of roots growing quietly underground, unseen and uncredited, holding up everything that ever looked, from above, like strength on its own. We thought of a fish, finally returned to water that actually suited it, moving with an ease that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with belonging. And we sat for a while in a room with nothing happening in it, and found it was not empty after all, only cleared, finally, of its usual noise. We gathered, near the end, all of these scattered images into the quiet, unremarkable life of an old woman by a harbor who had become, without ever trying to, exactly what every one of these old teachings was pointing toward all along. And we left even tonight's unfinished things resting under a soft cloth, exactly where they are, ready and waiting for whenever you are rested enough to return to them. You do not have to remember any of it. Not the stone, not the water, not the mountain, or the river, or the small steady candle. You do not have to recall a single story by name, or hold on to a single phrase, in order for any of it to have done its quiet work in you tonight. It has already settled in, the way the silt settles in the still water, the way a seed settles into dark soil, working now in places too quiet and too deep for you to need to keep watching it. There is nothing left to do tonight, nothing left to fix, nothing left to solve, nothing left to figure out before you are allowed to rest. The hard conversation will still be there tomorrow, exactly as unfinished as you left it, and so will every other small worry you have set down somewhere along this evening, resting quietly beside you rather than on your chest. None of it needs your attention again until you are ready to give it, rested, in whatever morning eventually arrives. You do not need to perform sleep, or chase it, or grip at it the way the young river once threw itself against every obstacle in its path. You only need to let your body be exactly as heavy and as tired as it already is, and let your breath move exactly as slow and as unremarkable as it already wants to move, and let the rest come the way water finds the sea, not by force, not by struggle, simply by continuing, gently, in roughly the right direction, for as long as it takes. There is nowhere else you need to be right now, no one else you need to become before morning, no version of tonight, other than the one actually unfolding around you, in this room, in this bed, in this particular, ordinary dark. This is enough. You are enough. exactly as tired and as unfinished and as human as you are tonight. Let your shoulders settle a little further into whatever is holding you right now. Let your hands soften wherever they happen to be resting. Let your jaw loosen and your forehead smooth, and the small muscles around your eyes finally let go of whatever they have been quietly holding all day long. There is nothing more required of any part of you right now. Only this: resting, breathing, being held by the bed the way a tired traveler is finally held by a fire they have stopped searching past. Feel the weight of the blanket, settled and familiar. Feel the particular quiet of this room, whatever sounds happen to be moving through it. Distant, soft, none of them requiring your attention. Feel your own breath, slower now than when we began, slower than it has been in some time, arriving and leaving on its own, asking nothing further of you. You can let your thoughts grow quieter now, the way water grows quieter, once it is finally left undisturbed. You do not have to follow them, or finish them, or tidy them into any particular order before sleep is allowed to come. Let them drift, loosely, the way clouds drift across an open sky, while the sky beneath them stays exactly as open and as unhurried as it has been the whole time. There is nothing left to carry tonight. The stone is resting beside the road. The water is clearing on its own. The candle is lit, small and sufficient, in the window. The mountain is steady beneath whatever weather moved through it today. The river is moving, unforced, toward the sea, and you are moving with it, gently, without needing to know exactly how far there is left to go. Sleep well. Whatever tomorrow holds, it can wait until you are rested enough to meet it. Tonight, there is only this: the dark, the breath, the slow settling of a tired body finally allowed to rest. Sleep well, and let the rest of it, all of it, simply wait.